they had ties to right-wing militias or had posted extremist views online. Joining us tonight for more on this is Spencer Coursen, an Austin-based threat management expert and author of The Safety Trap. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You know, the pro-Trump riot at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th really seemed to catch law enforcement by surprise. From what you have seen, how are inauguration preparations going now?
Tomorrow is on track to be the most secure inauguration in the history of the United States. Unlike the gross negligence and the criminal level of complacency that allowed for the Capitol attack on January 6th to take place, the Secret Service has, for the better part of the past year, really applied a highly effective protective application of both vigilance and due diligence. This is a national special security event, which means that they have the full resources of the United States at their disposal, which means federal agencies, local and state police, the military, the National Guard. And I have full faith and confidence that tomorrow will not only be a safe event, but it will be a successful event, and it will be a peaceful transfer of power.
During that insurrection at the Capitol, you just mentioned gross negligence on the part of security there. Explain a little bit more what you mean by that.
Well, what you ultimately saw was a failure in intelligence. The Capitol Police, like we saw with 9/11, there were silos of information. That information was not being shared, which meant that people in positions of power, the decision makers, were informing their decisions on bad intelligence. Had they had the intelligence that they needed, they were saying, up before that, the event, that there was no intelligence to support an insurrection, yet there was an insurmountable amount of evidence in support of that insurrection.
Let's talk a little bit about Austin and tomorrow. Do you expect there's going to be any trouble?
The intelligence that I have seen as of today, and I sat in on the police department briefing, was that they expect the protesters who will arrive tomorrow to be peaceful. However, just because there is no intelligence that, or actionable intelligence that says there will be a violent riot, that does not mean that when you have armed individuals on both sides and emotions are running high, that the potential for volatility is not present, because it most certainly will be.
Well, you just mentioned it, and the fact that tomorrow protesters could be packing. The police are going to be armed. How are officers going to go about dealing with people to make sure that nothing happens?
Well, living here in Texas, there's two schools of thought. One is that an armed society is a polite society. The second thing is that you do want to have protective measures in place. The Austin Police Department has their tactical deployment teams at the ready. They are not going to tolerate any kind of violent rhetoric or behavior. And I think that if you see even the slightest indication, even the most minuscule pre-incident indicator that something could happen, that law enforcement will step in and take immediate action to ensure the certainty of safety for everyone involved.
And really quickly, going forward beyond inauguration, how vigilant does law enforcement need to be when it comes to these militia type groups?
Well, I think to add some color to the context of that question, we want to look at what's going on in Washington, D.C., where there are more National Guard soldiers in Washington, D.C. right now than there are active duty service members in Afghanistan and Iraq combined. Let me be very clear. The far-right militias do pose the greatest domestic threat to the national security of the United States. Now, that's not to say that we don't have foreign concerns, or that the far left does not have their own foothold in domestic disruption. But the truth is that even though the numbers of right-wing extremists in militia groups has gone down the last 2 years, which is very common when you have a Republican in office, the projection of their sphere of influence and their rhetoric and even their numbers are expected to be at an all-time high in the coming months. And what that means is that from the Justice Department at the national level to police departments at the local level, they really need to be prepared, ready, and aware of the realistic threat they face and be prepared to respond to those groups once they present themselves.
Okay. Spencer Coursen with Coursen Security Group, thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.